Why is that woman sleeping on the floor? Next to my son. Ethan Ward stopped just inside the doorway. There, beneath the soft glow of dying embers, a woman lay on her side. Her body curved protectively around a small boy. His son, Liam's dark curls were pressed against her shoulder. One of her arms formed a barrier between the child and the open room, the other resting firmly on his back. Steady and sure. A thin blanket covered them both, not elegant, not planned, human. Ethan's breath stalled in his chest. Just a few hours earlier, this same room had been filled with a very different sound. It had started shortly after dusk. Liam's cries had ripped through the house without warning, raw, piercing screams that echoed off the high ceilings. The kind of cries that didn't ask for comfort, but demanded it. Mrs. Collins, the house manager, had been the first to rush in, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Aaliyah had followed moments later. Liam was on the rug then, his small body rigid, fists clenched, face red with pain and confusion. His hands flailed wildly, catching Aaliyah's arm as she knelt beside him, his nails raked across her skin, sharp and desperate. She sucked in a breath as blood welled up in thin lines along her forearm, but she didn't pull away. "It's all right," she had said softly, lowering herself until she was eye level with him. "I'm here. You're safe." Mrs. Collins had stiffened. "What are you doing? Pick him up." Aaliyah shook her head gently. "Not right now. He needs space. He needs—" Before she could finish, Liam screamed again, louder this time, his legs kicking. His heel struck Aaliyah's wrist, reopening the wound. Blood dripped onto the rug. Mrs. Collins gasped, more offended than concerned. "This is unacceptable. You're letting him hurt you. You're upsetting him even more." Aaliyah pressed her lips together, her voice still calm. "He's overwhelmed. Touching him too much right now will make it worse." Mrs. Collins crossed her arms, her mouth tightening. "Do you think you know better than the specialists? You were hired to help, not to lie on the floor like this. Get up." Aaliyah hesitated, her heart pounding. She glanced down at Liam, whose eyes were squeezed shut, tears streaking his face. His hands clawed blindly at the air until one found the fabric of her sweater. He latched on, trembling. "Please," Aaliyah said quietly. "Just give me a minute." Mrs. Collins's voice hardened. "You're overstepping. Mr. Ward does not tolerate this kind of behavior. If you can't handle the child, I will make sure you're dismissed tonight." The word dismissed landed like a blow. Aaliyah's breath caught. Her mind raced rent due, her mother's medication, the long list of jobs she'd lost for being too soft, too slow, too emotional. Her hands shook as she wrapped her injured arm closer to her body. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Please, I'm just trying to help him." Mrs. Collins looked at the blood on Aaliyah's sleeve with thinly veiled disgust. "Clean yourself up. This is a house, not a shelter." Aaliyah lowered her head. "Yes, ma'am." But she didn't leave Liam. Instead, she eased herself down onto the floor beside him, ignoring the sharp sting in her arm, ignoring the threat hanging in the air. She lay on her side, bringing herself down to his level, her voice dropping into something softer, older. She began to hum. It was a lullaby she barely remembered the words to. One her grandmother had sung when storms knocked out the power and fear crept into the corners of the room. Low, steady, unrushed. Liam's screams faltered. His breathing stuttered, then slowed. He turned toward the sound, his small hand finding her sleeve again, gripping it tightly. Aaliyah kept humming, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "It's okay," she murmured. "You don't have to be strong right now. We have a loaded 9. Minutes passed. Mrs. Collins stood frozen, then finally turned away, muttering under her breath. The house grew quiet again. By the time Ethan returned hours later, that quiet had settled into something else entirely. Now, standing in the doorway, Ethan took in the scene before him, the woman asleep on the floor, his son pressed against her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. He saw the dried blood on her sleeve, the careful way her body curved around Liam, shielding him even in sleep. He didn't move. He had seen specialists kneel beside his son, Therapists chart his reactions. Caregivers maintain careful distance. He had never seen anyone stay like this. On the floor, vulnerable, unprotected, something shifted in his chest. He stepped forward silently, retrieved a thicker blanket from the hall, and draped it over them both. Aaliyah stirred but didn't wake. Liam sighed softly, his grip tightening for just a second before relaxing again. Ethan turned off the lamp and went upstairs, carrying with him the image of a woman who had chosen the floor when everyone else had chosen to stand above his child. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the kitchen, pale and forgiving. Aaliyah woke stiff and sore, her arm throbbing. Panic flared briefly as she remembered Mrs. Collins' words. She carefully disentangled herself from Liam and carried him upstairs, laying him gently in his bed before washing the dried blood from her skin. In the kitchen, Ethan stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, coffee brewing. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, sir," she replied, her voice cautious. "You're hurt." She glanced at her arm. "It's nothing." He studied her for a moment. Liam slept through the night. Aaliyah nodded. He just needed someone to stay. Eris. Ethan poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "You can stay too." She looked up, startled. "Sir, I don't tolerate cruelty in my house," he said evenly. "Not toward my son. Not toward you." Her eyes filled, but she looked down quickly. "Thank you." As she turned to leave, Ethan watched her go, his mind no longer on contracts or meetings, but on a single, unsettling thought. What kind of person bleeds, is threatened, and still lies down on the floor to sing? And why did that feel like the first honest thing he'd seen in his own home in years? If this moment touched your heart, hit like and tell us where you're watching from. You might not be the only one in your city feeling this way tonight. Aaliyah Brooks stood at the bathroom sink, gently dabbing hydrogen peroxide onto the scratches lining her forearm. The antiseptic fizzed quietly, tracing a line of pink where Liam's small nails had broken skin just hours ago. She winced, not from the sting, but from the memory of Mrs. Collins's voice, sharp and cold, echoing through the room. "You're overstepping. Mr. Ward does not tolerate this kind of behavior." Aaliyah exhaled slowly and reached for the gauze roll in her small toiletry kit. She always carried one. Years working in pediatric care had taught her that life didn't wait for sterile environments or perfect timing. She moved with care, her fingers steady despite the tremble in her stomach. The scratches would heal, the humiliation would take longer. The kitchen downstairs still smelled faintly of cinnamon toast and coffee. She hadn't expected Mr. Ward to speak to her at all, let alone offer quiet protection in front of Mrs. Collins, who had since retreated into a silence even sharper than her words. Aaliyah buttoned her sleeve back down and glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Tired eyes, smooth brown skin, a curl slipping loose from the bun she'd retied too quickly. She wasn't fragile. She had weathered worse than this. But this place, this house with its glassy quiet, its unspoken rules and expensive silences, it made her feel like she didn't belong. She looked down at the faint blood stains still clinging to the cuff of her sweater. They'd wash out. Everything. Always did. Eventually, downstairs, she found Liam sitting cross-legged on the floor, building a precarious tower with wooden blocks. His face was focused, his lips parted in quiet concentration. Aaliyah knelt a few feet away, careful not to intrude. She didn't speak. After a moment, Liam looked up. His eyes met hers not quite fully, but close enough to count. He held out a block. Aaliyah blinked. "For me?" He didn't answer, but his hand didn't move. She reached forward slowly and took the block from him. Their fingers brushed for half a second. His eyes didn't dart away. "Thank you," she said gently. He picked up another block and placed it atop the tower. It wobbled. She leaned in just slightly, stabilizing the base with one hand. Liam glanced at her again but said nothing. This was how it always started, with stillness, not noise. With presence, not performance. Children like Liam didn't want to be fixed. They just needed someone who wouldn't leave when the room got too loud, when they got too scared, when the storm rose inside their small bodies. The door to the kitchen opened, and Mrs. Collins entered with her usual rigid posture and clipped heels. She looked at Aaliyah, then at the tower of blocks. "Mr. Ward is in his office," she said. He asked to see you. Aaliyah stood slowly. Is Liam okay to stay here? Mrs. Collins didn't answer. She simply crossed her arms and stood beside the boy as if guarding a vault. Aaliyah offered Liam a soft smile. I'll be right back, okay? He didn't respond. But as she stepped away, he reached for another block, his fingers moving with a calm that hadn't been there yesterday. Upstairs, the door to the study stood open. She knocked once on the frame. Come in, Ethan called. The room was warm, the scent of cedar faint beneath the smell of fresh paper and clean lines. He stood behind a long desk of dark oak, a laptop open before him. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching on the metal edges of picture frames his late wife. Perhaps, though Aaliyah didn't stare. You wanted to see me? She asked. Ethan gestured to the seat across from him. Please. She sat, her posture careful, not stiff but aware. He studied her for a long moment. How's your arm? It's fine, she said. Just scratches. I've had worse. I'm sure you have, he said quietly. I was told Liam became distressed last night. Aaliyah nodded slowly. It wasn't a meltdown in the typical sense, more like sensory overload. He was overtired, and the shift in schedule probably didn't help. It came on fast. Ethan folded his hands. And you responded by lying on the floor. It calms him, she said simply. Being on his level, taking away pressure. When I worked pediatrics, we were taught that safety isn't always vertical. Easy. Ethan didn't smile, but something behind his eyes softened. Most people would have stepped back, called for help. You didn't. No, she replied. Because stepping back would have felt like abandonment. And he's had enough of that already. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. Ethan broke the silence first. Mrs. Collins was out of line. Aaliyah's eyebrows rose slightly. I reviewed the footage, he added. This house is monitored. Not for discipline, but for oversight, for Liam's safety. Her throat tightened. I understand. She won't speak to you that way again. Aaliyah nodded. Thank you. He hesitated. I'd like to offer you a longer contract. She blinked. Sir? Not just evenings, full-time, if you're willing. Live in. I want consistency for Liam, and he seems to respond to you. Her pulse quickened. Are you sure? I don't make decisions lightly, Ethan said. The room down the hall from Liam's can be yours. It has a private bath. You'll have access to the kitchen, the sunroom, the garden, your own hours, your own keys. She stared at him, trying to read what lay beneath his calm exterior. I won't interfere in how you do your job, he added. Just give him what he needs. And what about what I need? She asked, before she could stop herself. He paused. What do you need, Miss Brooks? She looked down at her hands. To be treated like I'm not disposable. He was quiet for a long moment. Then that's where we'll start. Aaliyah nodded. She rose, thanked him, and stepped back into the hallway. The sound of Liam's laughter echoed faintly from the downstairs corridor. For the first time since she arrived, she didn't feel like a visitor. Just maybe, this house wasn't as cold as it seemed. The room down the hall from Liam's was larger than Aaliyah expected. Not luxurious, but carefully appointed cream-colored walls, a wide window overlooking the garden, and a modest oak dresser polished to a dull shine. The bed was neatly made with a pale blue comforter, the kind that felt soft but impersonal, like it belonged to a guest, not a resident. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her suitcase still clutched in one hand. The housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, had shown her the space with the same tone someone might use to point out the emergency exit on an airplane. Efficient. Cold. Impatient. Your meals are in the side fridge. Help yourself, within reason, she had said. Please remember, Mr. Ward values privacy. No wandering. No lingering in the main hallways unless you're summoned. Aaliyah had nodded, biting her tongue. She wasn't here to argue. She was here for Liam. Now, with the house quiet around her, she exhaled and set her suitcase by the foot of the bed. Her hand lingered on the zipper for a second longer than necessary before she opened it. Inside were her folded scrubs, a single cardigan, 3 paperback books with worn spines, and a framed photo of her mother smiling from a hospital bed. The IV line was barely visible. She set the photo gently on the dresser. "This time," she whispered, "I won't mess it up." Oh. Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed once. Noon. She had 3 hours before Liam's occupational therapy session. She made her way to the kitchen, careful not to step too heavily on the hardwood floors. The sound of her sneakers still felt out of place, too soft for the sharp angles of the house, too familiar for this kind of wealth. The kitchen was empty. Sleek stainless steel appliances lined the walls, all humming with quiet precision. A digital calendar blinked from the corner screen above the pantry. Liam. OT 3 p.m. Dinner with board reps. 6:30 p.m. Grocery delivery. Postponed. She pulled a mug from the cabinet, choosing one that said, "World's Okayest Cook," in fading blue letters, the only mug that looked like it belonged to a human being. She poured herself a cup of black coffee, grateful for the heat more than the caffeine, and moved to the corner breakfast nook to sit. From there, she could see the garden. Neatly trimmed hedges, a stone path winding around a small bird bath, and a maple tree shedding its first yellow leaves. It reminded her of her grandmother's backyard in Baton Rouge, the only place that had ever felt like home before the foster system had taken over. She didn't hear footsteps, but suddenly, Ethan Ward stood in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing a dark gray button-down and dark jeans, sleeves rolled up, his expression unreadable. "I didn't mean to intrude," Aaliyah said quickly, setting down her mug and rising. "You're not," he replied. "It's your kitchen too now." That was the agreement. She gave a small nod, unsure if that was permission or just acknowledgement. "Thank you. Liam has OT at 3. I saw the calendar. I'll drive you both," he said, walking to the coffee pot. "I want to speak to his therapist. Get a sense of how he's progressing." She hesitated. "I've taken him before. I usually give the update." "I'm not doubting your notes," he said, pouring himself a cup. "But I need to see it myself." The air between them shifted slightly, not hostile, just clipped, businesslike. Aaliyah swallowed. "Of course." Ethan glanced at her as he leaned against the counter. "Did you settle in all right?" "Yes, sir. The room is comfortable." "You don't need to call me sir," he said. "It's not that kind of house." She tilted her head slightly. "I haven't figured out what kind of house it is yet." His mouth twitched, as if considering a smile, but it never fully formed. "Let me know if you need anything," he said instead, and left the kitchen, his footsteps fading into the hallway. Aaliyah sat back down slowly, picking up her mug again. The coffee had cooled. She looked around the spotless room. The untouched fruit bowl. The imported espresso machine that likely hadn't been used in months. It was a beautiful house, but beauty didn't make it warm. Not yet. Later that afternoon, Liam sat in the back seat of the SUV, clutching a small plush bear Aaliyah had found tucked in his travel bag. His eyes flicked between the windows and the dashboard, his feet swinging above the floor mat in silent rhythm. Ethan drove without speaking. Aaliyah sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. The therapy center was across town, tucked behind a small church and a row of trees that had started to turn. The inside was cheerful murals of ocean animals on the walls, a fish tank bubbling quietly near the front desk. "Hey there, Liam." The receptionist greeted warmly as they entered. Liam didn't respond, but he looked at her hand when she waved. That was something. Aaliyah spoke with the therapist while Ethan stood nearby, listening. "Last week, we worked on basic sensory integration," the therapist explained. "Weighted blankets, texture exploration, basic counting." "How did he respond?" Ethan asked. The woman glanced at Aaliyah. "Honestly, better than we expected. Especially when Miss Brooks is present. He tracks her voice, follows her movements." Ethan didn't reply right away. He looked down the hallway where Liam had wandered ahead, waiting for the door to the therapy room to open. Later, in the car, the silence stretched longer than before. "He does better with you," Ethan said quietly, his eyes on the road. Aaliyah nodded, unsure how to respond. "Don't get comfortable," he added. "That's not a warning. It's a fact. This house, it has a way of pushing people out. Not everyone fits." She looked out the window. "I've never really fit anywhere." He glanced at her, just once. "Maybe that's why you do." They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. But when they pulled into the driveway, and Liam reached for Aaliyah's hand as they got out, Ethan noticed. and it stayed with him longer than he expected. The wind had picked up outside, whistling softly through the cracks of the old window frames as dusk settled over the Ward estate. Inside, the air felt still, thick with the kind of silence that arrived only in houses too big for the number of people living in them. Aaliyah stood in the doorway of the playroom, watching Liam trace shapes on a sensory board with his fingers. It had been a long day, one marked by small victories. Liam had said 2 words, unprompted, blue and soft, while identifying textures with the therapist. He had looked her in the eyes for a full 5 seconds. 5 seconds. It didn't sound like much, but in the world of autism care, 5 seconds could be everything. "Do you want a snack?" she asked gently. Liam didn't respond, but he stood and walked toward the kitchen. A clear enough answer. Aaliyah followed him, keeping pace without pressure, letting him lead. She prepared a small plate, sliced apples, crackers, and a tiny scoop of peanut butter, just how he liked it. She poured him a glass of water, placed everything on the low table near the fireplace, and sat across from him on the rug. Liam ate in silence, eyes focused on the fire crackling behind the safety screen. Aaliyah watched him, not analyzing, not pushing, just present. After a while, she pulled a small hardcover book from the side table and began to read aloud in a soft, rhythmic voice. Not a story with big plot twists, just a gentle tale about a bear who couldn't sleep. Liam edged closer. First by a few inches, then a few more. By the time the bear in the book was curled up in his cave, Liam's head had come to rest lightly against Aaliyah's side. Her breath caught, and she instinctively froze, but she didn't speak. She just turned the page. Outside, the temperature dropped. The windows fogged around the edges. Aaliyah grabbed the throw blanket from the couch and draped it over Liam, who now leaned fully against her. He yawned. "Getting sleepy, buddy?" she whispered. No answer. She shifted slightly, reclining into a more comfortable position on the rug, mindful not to disturb him. Her arm curled protectively around his small frame as he let out another yawn, and then, slowly, fell asleep. Aaliyah lay back beside him, the fire warming one side of her face. Her other arm still looped around the child who had, somehow, chosen her as his calm. She looked at the ceiling, listening to the fire crackle, her heart full in a way she hadn't felt in years. Not since the NICU, not since that tiny, silent crib. The past rose uninvited. Her son, Micah, born 2 months early. He never got to cry, never got to reach for her. Just those quiet, blinking eyes. For the 3 days they gave her. She hadn't sung since then, not until last night. And yet, here she was again, on a floor, next to another small boy, humming the same broken lullaby. She didn't notice the door had opened. Ethan had returned home earlier than expected. The meeting had ended in another round of hollow handshakes and promises, and he'd had enough of boardroom performance. He needed quiet, and maybe, without admitting it aloud, he needed to see how Liam was doing. He stepped into the living room, already loosening his tie, when he saw them. Aaliyah on the floor. Liam curled beside her, half covered by the blanket, her hand resting on his back, her eyes open, unfocused, staring at the fire with a look that wasn't quite sadness, wasn't quite peace. He froze. He'd seen many people with Liam, professionals with degrees, specialists with thick binders, nannies with too much perfume and too little patience. But this wasn't care. This was presence. Real. Aaliyah didn't see him at first. When she finally turned her head and met his eyes, there was no panic in her expression, just a kind of tired understanding, like she expected to be reprimanded, as if she were used to it. "I didn't mean to fall asleep," she said quietly. "He came to me. I didn't want to move him. Well, you didn't fall asleep," Ethan replied. "Not really." She blinked. "Sir? You were keeping him safe." The silence between them stretched. "I can move him to his bed," she offered, beginning to shift. "No," Ethan said, stepping forward. "Let him stay. For now." She paused, her body still tense. "Mrs. Collins doesn't approve of this sort of thing. I'll speak with her." Aaliyah's brow furrowed slightly. "She doesn't think I belong here." Ethan hesitated. "Neither did I." She raised an eyebrow, not offended, curious. But then, he added, I saw my son sleep through the night for the first time in a month. Aaliyah looked down at Liam, who stirred slightly and then nestled closer. I'm not magic, she murmured. I just don't leave. Ethan's expression shifted. Something softened. I don't think anyone's ever said that in this house, he said. She didn't reply. Just watched the fire for a few more seconds before speaking again. I was a pediatric nurse before this, back in Baton Rouge. Lost the job when the hospital shut down half its wing. Too expensive to keep kids alive, I guess. He watched her. I took this job because I needed the money, she continued. I'm staying because he needs someone who knows how to listen without fixing. Ethan nodded slowly. Stay as long as you want. Her voice was soft, almost unsure. You mean that? I do. Oh. Then, quietly, he stepped out of the room, leaving them there curled in firelight and silence. Later that night, he passed by again on his way upstairs and found them still there. The fire had faded to glowing coals. The blanket slipping slightly off Aaliyah's shoulder. He paused, retrieved another from the closet, and placed it over them. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the boy who hadn't smiled for weeks, and the woman who had come in like a whisper and made something shift. The house felt less empty somehow, and Ethan wondered if maybe, just maybe, some people were meant to stay not because they were hired, but because they were needed. The morning after the firelight, the Ward estate was unusually still. Not the usual kind of silence, cold, structured, expectant, but something gentler, like a held breath. Aaliyah awoke slowly, blinking against the soft gray light seeping through the living room windows. Her shoulder ached slightly from the floor, but she didn't move right away. Liam was still asleep, his head resting near her ribs, his breath soft and warm against the fabric of her sweater. His hand, small and relaxed, was curled around a fold of the blanket. For once, his brow wasn't furrowed, his body not tense. Peace, as rare and fragile as snow in the south. Aaliyah brushed a loose curl from his forehead. You're safe, she whispered. She gently shifted out from under him, cradling his head as she slipped a pillow in her place. He stirred but didn't wake. She covered him back up and stood, her joints protesting with quiet creaks. She folded the extra blanket Ethan had left over them in the night and looked toward the stairs, where she was certain he'd disappeared hours ago. The kettle in the kitchen hissed, and the smell of toast began to drift through the air. She moved toward the sound, running a hand over the back of her neck. Her hair, no longer tightly pinned, fell into soft coils around her jaw. She didn't bother to fix it. Not today. Mrs. Collins was already at the stove when Aaliyah entered. The older woman turned, her expression unreadable. Not icy, but not warm either. I didn't expect you to still be here, she said, her tone cool. I didn't expect to be, either, Aaliyah replied simply, stepping past her to pour a glass of water. There was a beat of silence before Mrs. Collins spoke again. Mr. Ward said you'll be staying full-time. Aaliyah nodded. That's what he told me. Another pause. Mrs. Collins wiped her hands on a towel, her movements sharp. Just so we're clear, she said, her voice dropping a register. This is a household with standards. Mr. Ward values routine, order, discretion. 89. And I value children feeling safe, Aaliyah said, not unkindly. I think we can coexist. Mrs. Collins stared at her for a long moment, then turned back to the stove without a word. Aaliyah didn't expect friendship. She wasn't looking for approval, but she knew hostility when she saw it. She'd grown up navigating systems built to push her aside. Foster homes, hospitals that refused second opinions, hiring managers who read her resume and still called her sweetheart. She had no intention of shrinking for anyone, not anymore. By the time Liam woke, the sun had risen higher, and the morning had found its rhythm. Aaliyah helped him through breakfast, guiding him gently through each step: toast, banana slices, small sips of water. He was quieter than usual but calm. He even allowed her to brush his hair without flinching. You're being very brave today, she whispered. Afterward, they walked in the garden. Aaliyah let him wander a few steps ahead, trailing his fingers along the hedges, pointing at leaves. She crouched nearby, noting the soft tapping pattern of his shoes on the stone path, the way he paused at every sound bird calls. rustling branches, distant traffic. The world overwhelmed him, but it also fascinated him. From an upstairs window, Ethan watched them. He'd seen therapists try to draw Liam out with flashcards and charts, behavioral plans printed in color-coded folders. He had paid for the best, traveled cross-state for specialists, donated to research centers, and yet here was a woman with no clipboard, no corporate bio, just a scarred forearm and a steady voice. And his son followed her like the earth follows the sun. He stepped away from the window. Later that afternoon, Ethan found himself pausing at the entrance of the playroom. Aaliyah was sitting cross-legged on the floor, helping Liam stack blocks. Her posture relaxed, her voice low and rhythmic. "Green on top," she murmured. "That's it. Balance." Liam tilted his head and placed another block crooked, but holding. Ethan cleared his throat, and Aaliyah looked up. "Hi," she said, without standing. "Hi," Ethan replied, feeling inexplicably self-conscious. "I just wanted to check in." She nodded. "He's doing well today, very present. No overstimulation so far." Ethan stepped further into the room, watching the child he barely recognized as his own. "He doesn't usually let people sit that close. He decides when he's ready," Aaliyah said. "I just wait." There was no pride in her tone, no ego, just truth. Ethan crossed his arms. "I've been thinking about adjustments." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "To the house," he clarified. "More child-safe furniture, fewer glass edges, soundproofing in the den so he has a quiet space if he needs one." Aaliyah tilted her head. "That's good. I don't want him to feel like a guest in his own home." She looked at him, really looked at him. "And what about you?" He frowned. "What about me? Do you feel like you belong here?" The question landed harder than he expected. "I own the place," he said dryly. "Sometimes that's the loneliest position of all," she replied. Ethan didn't answer. He looked at Liam, who was now placing a block in her open palm. After a pause, he said, "I used to think love was about doing everything right, providing, protecting, not showing weakness. It is, one too." Aaliyah nodded slowly. "Sometimes it's just being willing to sit on the floor." Their eyes met quiet, unsentimental, but connected. Ethan cleared his throat again. "Dinner's at 6. You're welcome to join." "I thought you had a board meeting." "I do," he said, "but I'll cancel it." She blinked. "That important?" "I've already met the most important stakeholder today," he said, gesturing toward Liam, and then he left the room, not waiting for a reply. Behind him, Aaliyah turned back to the child beside her, a soft smile playing at her lips. Something was shifting in this house, and this time, it wasn't her. The sun filtered through the tall pines that edged the Ward estate, casting a dappled light over the garden path where Aaliyah walked slowly beside Liam. It was mid-morning, warm but not yet stifling, and the world felt unusually quiet, peaceful, even. Aaliyah held Liam's favorite plush bear in one hand and a folded notepad in the other, scribbling occasional observations with her usual precision. Liam walked a few paces ahead, his arms slightly raised as he traced patterns through the air, imaginary lines that made sense only to him. His sneakers made soft crunching sounds over the gravel, and every few steps, he paused to crouch and inspect something. A beetle crawling across a rock, a fallen yellow leaf, the shadow of his own hand. He was more curious lately, more still. That stillness hadn't come easily. Aaliyah remembered the first day she'd arrived. The blankness in his stare, the flinches, the resistance to touch. Even a whisper too sharp had sent him into spirals. But now he watched. He listened. He didn't always speak, but he stayed. And sometimes, he reached out. Like yesterday, they had been in the library, her idea, though Mrs. Collins had sniffed at it. Aaliyah had laid out oversized picture books with textures and colors, let Liam explore at his own pace. She'd sat by the window, reading aloud but without expectation. After 20 minutes, she had felt a small hand slip into hers. No words, no warning, just his hand, resting in hers like it had always belonged there. It had only lasted a few seconds, but it was enough. She didn't tell Ethan. Some moments didn't need to be shared. Some things were just for the people inside them. Today, though, Liam did something new. As they turned the corner back toward the house, He paused and looked over his shoulder. Then, without prompting, he extended his hand toward her. Aaliyah blinked. "Do you want me to hold it?" she asked, gently. He didn't speak, but he didn't lower it either. She stepped forward, her heart thudding, and took his hand lightly in hers. It was warm, dry, small, and surprisingly strong. They walked the last 30 feet to the house like that, fingers laced, silence stretching between them in the most beautiful way. When they reached the door, Liam let go. Just like that. No drama, no fear, just transition. Inside, Mrs. Collins stood by the foyer, clipboard in hand. She raised one eyebrow at the sight. "He's touching now?" she asked. Not unkindly, but with surprise. Aaliyah simply nodded. Sometimes, progress is unexpected. It's what happens when no one pushes. Mrs. Collins didn't reply. Ethan entered a moment later, phone pressed to his ear. His eyes landed on Liam's calm posture, then on Aaliyah's hand, slowly smoothing down her skirt. A look passed through his eyes, quick, thoughtful, unreadable. He ended the call. "How was the garden?" he asked. "Peaceful," Aaliyah replied. "Anything notable?" She hesitated. He reached out. Ethan looked at Liam. "Voluntarily?" Aaliyah nodded. "Just for a moment. Things were munted. That's more than anyone's managed in 2 years." She looked at him, surprised by the quiet note of wonder in his voice. Ethan crouched beside his son. "Hey, buddy." Liam blinked, didn't look directly at him, but didn't shy away either. Ethan held out a hand, not forcing, just offering. Liam didn't take it, but he didn't run. Later that afternoon, Aaliyah prepared a snack tray. Apple slices, cheddar cubes, and half a sandwich with the crusts cut off. She brought it to the sunroom where Liam now liked to sit in the late hours. The warm light helped, she had noticed. It seemed to regulate him in a way fluorescent bulbs never could. As he ate, she opened her notepad and began sketching a rough daily plan. Gentle routines, sensory breaks, rest cues. Behind her, a soft cough interrupted the quiet. She turned to find Ethan leaning in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, no tie. The casualness looked good on him, less guarded. "You keep notes?" he asked, nodding at her pad. "Helps me spot patterns," she replied. "What works? What doesn't? What needs to be tried differently? Would you be willing to share them?" She hesitated. "They're handwritten, and a little messy. I'm not looking for a report. I'm looking for insight." She tore the top page from the pad and handed it to him. "Start here." He glanced at the bullet points, nodding. "You don't use standard codes?" "Oh, I'm not a therapist," she said with a small smile. "I'm just present." Ethan folded the paper carefully. "Presence isn't just enough, it's rare." She looked away, unsure how to respond. He continued, more softly now. "Liam hasn't had this kind of consistency since his mother died." Aaliyah blinked. It was the first time he'd mentioned her. She passed when Liam was 15 months. Sudden. Heart issue. We were still learning how to parent. Then just me, and the grief made everything louder. Aaliyah said nothing, but her gaze softened. "I tried to build walls," he added. "But Liam, he doesn't thrive inside walls." "No child does," she whispered. They stood in silence for a long moment. Outside, a breeze rustled the hedges. Inside, Liam tapped his plate twice, his quiet signal that he was finished. "I'll clean up," Aaliyah offered, reaching for the tray. Ethan stopped her gently. "You don't have to do everything." She looked at him. "I don't mind. Some of us were raised to clean as a way of being seen." His eyes flickered with something like recognition, and some of us were raised to disappear behind achievement. They both smiled, just a little. That evening, as twilight settled over the estate, Ethan stepped into his office and stared at the family photo on his desk, just him, Liam, and Rachel. Before everything changed, he picked up the picture, then turned it face down. In the reflection of the window, he saw Aaliyah walking down the hallway with Liam, his small hand nestled safely in hers. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Ward felt something stir in his chest that wasn't regret. It was hope. The scent of fresh brewed coffee filled the kitchen as Aaliyah sliced strawberries onto a plate with practiced ease. It was just past 7 a.m., the sun still stretching its golden limbs across the slate tiles, and the house was beginning to stir soft footsteps overhead, the muffled hum of the shower in the east wing, the rhythmic clicking of Mrs. Collins unlocking the pantry. Liam sat at the kitchen island in his booster seat, slowly dipping one piece of toast into a small cup of applesauce. His movements were deliberate, his eyes focused, his lips pursed in quiet concentration. Aaliyah kept an eye on him as she moved around the kitchen, barefoot, hair tied back in a loose scarf that matched the color of the morning sky. Ethan entered the room in slacks and a white button-up shirt, sleeves rolled and collar undone. He looked tired, but less guarded than usual. He paused in the doorway, watching the domestic scene unfold in front of him, his son calm, his house warm, his kitchen no longer silent. "Good morning," Aaliyah greeted without turning around, aware of his presence the way one senses a change in air pressure. "Morning," Ethan replied. "Smells like strawberries and sanity," she chuckled. "A rare combination, I know." He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, sipping slowly as he observed. "You're up early." "I always am," she said. "Habit. When I was in nursing, 5 a.m. meant meds, rounds, and checking vitals before the sun was fully awake." He nodded. "I suppose some routines never leave us. Some routines are survival," she replied. Liam dropped a piece of toast on the counter and looked up, brows furrowed. Aaliyah gently reached over, wiped his hand, and offered him another slice. He accepted it without fuss. Ethan watched closely. "He trusts you." Aaliyah's voice was quiet. "I don't rush him. He sets the rhythm. I just stay with it." Ethan glanced down into his coffee. "I didn't know how to do that." "You were grieving," she said. "Grief speeds everything up or slows it to a crawl, never the pace we need." He didn't respond right away. The silence between them didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. Mrs. Collins entered then, clipboard in hand, breaking the stillness with her usual click-click of polished heels. She took one look at the breakfast table, her lips pursing at the lack of linen napkins and silver juice carafes. "I've placed Liam's therapy notes on your desk, Mr. Ward," she said coolly. "Thank you," Ethan replied without looking up. Mrs. Collins turned to Aaliyah. "There's a new grocery order arriving this afternoon. Please be mindful of perishables and don't restock the staff fridge without my direction." "I wasn't aware there was a staff fridge," Aaliyah said evenly, not rising to the bait. "There is," Mrs. Collins answered with a clipped tone. "Separate from the family fridge. We maintain professional lines here." Aaliyah nodded. "I'll remember that. We have decrees this small." Ethan set his coffee down. "Actually, I'd like to do away with that rule." Both women turned to look at him. Aaliyah's expression stayed neutral. Mrs. Collins' eyebrows rose. "From now on," Ethan continued, "Aaliyah has full access to both kitchens, and to the garden-produced deliveries. Liam eats better when she prepares his meals." Mrs. Collins didn't respond, but her jaw clenched ever so slightly. She nodded curtly, then turned on her heel and left the room. Aaliyah glanced at Ethan, unsure whether to thank him or let the moment pass. She settled for neither. Instead, she reached across the counter and handed him a piece of strawberry. "For you," she said lightly. "Try leading with fruit next time you break a house rule. It softens the blow." Ethan accepted the strawberry with a faint smirk. Duly noted. 2. Later that day, while Liam napped, Aaliyah sat in the small den just off the sunroom, flipping through one of the worn paperbacks she kept in her bag. The book wasn't anything special, an old romance about two people stuck in an elevator during a blizzard, but she liked how it reminded her that not all tension had to be explosive. Sometimes, tension just lingered, quietly. Ethan appeared in the doorway with a folder in hand. "Got a minute?" he asked. She nodded and closed the book. He crossed the room and handed her the folder. "I've been consulting on a new app, something for single parents navigating early diagnoses. Autism, ADHD, sensory disorders. It's still in beta, but we're trying to build something practical, not just flashy." She opened the folder and scanned the mock-ups. "It's clean, intuitive. I want your input." She looked up. "Why me?" "You see the kid, Not the label. That's what this app is missing. She sat up straighter. You really want my opinion? I don't ask questions I don't want answers to. Her fingers moved across the pages. Then I'd start by making it more human, less sterile, more lived in. Add audio guides for parents with low literacy. And maybe an anonymous chat for the ones too scared to ask questions aloud. Ethan's gaze sharpened. You've thought about this before. She hesitated. I've lived it. My sister raised 3 boys on her own. One was nonverbal until 7. She didn't have apps. She had library books and exhaustion. He nodded, taking her words in. Would you be open to sitting in on a development call next week? She blinked. Like, in the meeting? Yes. Aaliyah felt something shift inside her, a door she'd assumed was closed. She nodded. I'd like that. That evening, as Liam fell asleep curled beside his favorite bear, Aaliyah turned off the nightlight and closed the door quietly behind her. She padded down the hallway, her bare feet making no sound. Ethan was in the study, leaning back in his chair, staring at the same family photo she'd seen him move days earlier. He looked up as she paused in the doorway. I didn't know you were still awake, she said. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. Too much in my head. She stepped inside. Want to talk about it? He thought for a moment. You ever feel like your house is haunted? She raised an eyebrow. Haunted by what? Memories, he said. Expectations. Regret. 2 happened. Aaliyah considered that, then sat in the armchair across from him. Yes, she said. But I also think homes can be healed. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. You believe that? I have to, she replied softly. Otherwise, I'd be nothing more than a visitor in every room I enter. He leaned forward. You're not a visitor. The words hung between them honest, clear, and in that moment, neither of them said anything more, because something was forming. Quietly, something neither of them dared name just yet. The calendar said it was just another Wednesday. But to Aaliyah, the energy in the air felt different, strange, heavy, almost off rhythm. Liam had woken up more restless than usual. No screaming, no meltdown, but a visible tension had settled in his shoulders, like a storm cloud pressing just above his skin. Aaliyah had tried all her usual tools. Weighted vest, calming playlist, lavender-scented lotion. Nothing worked. By mid-morning, Liam was pacing the hallway outside the library, his little fingers tugging at the hem of his shirt in a repetitive, anxious rhythm. She knelt down beside him. Talk to me, buddy, she whispered. What's in there? He didn't respond, but his hand rose, index finger tapping his chest 3 times, then pointing toward the living room. She followed the gesture and walked him gently toward the room. Inside, the fire had been lit earlier than usual. Mrs. Collins had arranged fresh flowers on the mantel, a rare splash of yellow lilies in a space that mostly stayed muted. And on the side table, a single picture frame, a woman smiling, holding a baby in her arms, Liam, just a few months old. Aaliyah blinked. She hadn't seen the photo before. Ethan must have put it out that morning. She turned back to Liam. Is it about her? She asked gently. Liam didn't answer, but he took a deep breath. Then he walked over to the chair in the corner, the one no one ever sat in, and climbed into it, curling up like a cat finding its spot. Something about today meant something to him. She quietly stepped into the hallway and caught Mrs. Collins coming from the kitchen. Is today an anniversary? Aaliyah asked. Mrs. Collins paused, stiffened slightly. It's Rachel's birthday. Aaliyah's chest tightened. Did anyone tell Liam? No, we don't bring it up. Mr. Ward finds it too difficult. Aaliyah frowned. But Liam remembers. Mrs. Collins didn't respond, just gave a faint shake of her head and walked away. An hour later, Ethan returned from a brief off-site meeting. He removed his jacket at the door and handed his car keys to the valet, who nodded silently. As he stepped into the house, he noticed the quiet again. It wasn't unusual for the estate to feel still, but lately, the quiet felt different, like something had settled in the bones of the place, something new, something soft. He found Aaliyah in the sunroom, sitting on the floor, head bent over a piece of paper. Liam was asleep beside her, his head in her lap, a blanket over his shoulders. The fireplace glowed low, casting gold along the edges of her face. "What is that?" Ethan asked softly, stepping inside. Aaliyah looked up. "A drawing." He approached, crouching to see. Liam had drawn two figures, one tall, one small. Both with round, sun-like heads and long, straight arms. The smaller one held a balloon. The larger one had a crown. Beside them, a single word. "Mommy." Ethan's breath hitched. "I didn't ask him to draw," Aaliyah said. "He just did it." After seeing her photo, Ethan nodded, swallowing thickly. Today was her birthday. "I know." He sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, looking at his son's face so peaceful, so unaware of how fragile his father still was. "I haven't told him about her in a long time," Ethan admitted. "I was afraid it would break something in him. Or in me." Aaliyah's voice was low. "He didn't break." He remembered. Ethan looked at her. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't," she said. "But I know what not to run from." That evening, Aaliyah prepared a small chocolate cake in the kitchen. She didn't ask permission. She didn't consult anyone. She just did it soft, rich, simple, the way a mother might make at home. No fanfare, no candles, just memory. She placed it on a plate in the dining room. Liam sat at the table with his bear. Ethan joined them, hands in his lap. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Aaliyah cut 3 slices, one for Liam, one for Ethan, one that she set on a side plate, in front of the empty chair. "For Rachel," she said softly. Ethan stared at the plate, then at her. "She used to do that," he said. "Set an extra place at the table when her dad passed." Aaliyah smiled gently. "Some people don't go away just because they're not here." They ate in silence, and for once, it wasn't sad. It was sacred. Later that night, as Liam slept and the cake sat half-eaten in the fridge, Aaliyah stood by the back porch, watching the stars. Ethan joined her, holding 2 cups of tea. "I was 26 when I met her," he said suddenly. "She had this laugh that didn't belong in boardrooms. It was too bright, too loud." Aaliyah listened. "She told me I was boring, so I married her. Reliva." She smiled. "Sounds like something I'd say." "She would have liked you," Ethan added, then paused. "I think she'd be grateful." Aaliyah looked at him, her voice soft. "Grateful for what?" "For bringing him back." They stood there a while longer. No touching, no confessions. Just shared silence under a soft November sky. And for Ethan Ward, the grief didn't feel like a chain anymore. It felt like a bridge. The sun had barely risen when the intercom buzzed. Aaliyah was in the laundry room folding Liam's shirts, each one carefully labeled with a small patch she had sewn into the inside hem. Blue for calm days, green for sensory exploration, yellow for therapy. She didn't stop what she was doing until the second buzz echoed, louder this time. Mrs. Collins appeared in the doorway a moment later, frowning. "There's a man at the gate," she said. "Says he's from Rachel's side of the family." Aaliyah blinked. "That's unusual. And he has no appointment, no call ahead, just showed up. Does Mr. Ward know?" "He's in a meeting." Aaliyah hesitated. She knew how these things went. Strangers with old grief often brought more mess than meaning. But something in Mrs. Collins' voice gave her pause. Not fear exactly, but concern. Mrs. Collins never showed concern unless it was earned. "I'll go see," Aaliyah said. The security footage flickered to life on the hallway console. The man standing at the gate looked to be in his mid-50s. Tall and lean with a hard jaw and sun-weathered skin. He wore a navy peacoat, buttoned too tightly, and held a black hat in his hand. His posture was stiff, like someone used to waiting in long lines for bad news. Aaliyah pressed the intercom. "This is the Ward residence. May I help you?" The man leaned in slightly, squinting. "Name's Charles Lannister. I'm Rachel's uncle. I'm here to see the boy." "The boy?" "Her son. My great-nephew." Aaliyah's spine straightened. The way he said the boy like Liam was an item, not a person, didn't sit right. She didn't answer immediately. "This is a private estate." "I'm aware," he said. "And I don't want trouble." I just want to speak to Ethan. It's about family. Aaliyah's hand hovered over the end call button, but something in the man's eyes, tired, yes, but sharp, made her hesitate. He didn't look like he wanted to argue. He looked like someone who'd been arguing his whole life. I'll notify Mr. Ward, she said. Please wait. She walked straight to Ethan's study. Ethan was on a call, headset tucked into one ear, tapping a pen against a notepad filled with numbers. When he saw Aaliyah, he held up a finger, signaling 1 minute. But then he saw her expression. He clicked off the headset. What is it? There's a man at the gate, she said. Charles Lannister. Says he's Rachel's uncle. That is not her. Ethan leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he closed the notepad. I haven't heard that name in 10 years. He wants to see Liam. Ethan's jaw tightened. Of course he does. And what else does he want? Aaliyah didn't answer. I'll handle it, he said, standing. Do you want me with you? He paused, then nodded. Yes. Charles Lannister stood near the gate, arms crossed, face still as stone. When Ethan approached, the older man's eyes softened not with warmth, but familiarity. Ethan. Charles. It's been a long time. Not long enough, apparently. Charles nodded, accepting the barb. I didn't come to dig up graves. Then why now? Charles looked past him toward the house, then back. Because I heard Rachel's boy is being raised by a stranger. And I thought, someone in the family should know who he is. Aaliyah stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. He's being raised by his father. Charles looked at her, surprised by her presence, then down at her name tag. You're the nanny? Aaliyah didn't flinch. I'm the one who loves him every day. The words hung there, sharper than a slap. Ethan crossed his arms. What do you want, Charles? I want to talk. Share some photos. Tell the boy about his mother's side. He deserves that, doesn't he? You didn't even come to the funeral. I was in recovery, Charles said tightly. And not from drink, from war. Ethan's face flickered. I didn't know. You didn't ask. A long pause followed. Then Charles reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. Inside were a few photos, Rachel as a child, Rachel holding a dog, Rachel in graduation robes. Real, raw, unposed. The kind of images Ethan hadn't seen in years. I thought maybe, when the time was right, you'd show him. Ethan took the box slowly. Charles exhaled. That's all. I don't want money, don't want custody. Just wanted to see he's alive, that someone's loving him. Ethan looked at Aaliyah, who nodded gently. He is, Ethan said, and not just by me. Charles turned to go, then stopped. You're doing better than I expected, Ethan smirked. So am I. And then the man was gone, his figure shrinking along the driveway until the gate shut quietly behind him. That evening, Aaliyah sat on the edge of Liam's bed as he flipped slowly through the photos. She had scanned them first, careful to select only the ones that wouldn't overwhelm him, images of Rachel holding sunflowers, laughing with her dog, feeding ducks at a pond. She liked animals, Aaliyah said softly. Liam's fingers traced a photo edge. Then he whispered, almost inaudibly, Mommy. Aaliyah's eyes filled. Yes, baby. That's her. He looked up at her, confused but calm, and for the first time, Liam didn't flinch at the word, mother. He just held the photo against his chest and leaned into Aaliyah's side. Down the hall, Ethan stood in the doorway, watching. He didn't speak. He just smiled, small, broken, but real. It was a quiet morning again, too quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't soothe, but warned. Aaliyah knew that feeling. It was the silence right before a tantrum, or just after bad news. It was the way a room held its breath before someone cried, or someone left. Liam hadn't come out of his room yet. Usually by 7:30 a.m., he was up, padding across the hall in his socks, asking for his bear with a whisper or a glance. But today, nothing. She checked on him gently. The curtains were still drawn, the room dim. He lay curled on his side, hugging his pillow. Not asleep, but not present, either. Aaliyah knelt beside his bed. Hey, sweet boy, she whispered. Want to tell me what's going on in that mind of yours? He didn't answer. His fingers traced circles over the bedsheet. She waited. That was always the key with Liam: not talking, not pushing. Waiting. After a long moment, he finally reached for her hand, small, shaking, and that's when she knew. This wasn't just a bad morning. Something had broken open inside him. In the kitchen, Ethan was drinking coffee, reviewing emails on his tablet. He looked up when Aaliyah entered. Her face told him everything before she even spoke. "He's not okay today," she said softly. He stood. "What happened?" She hesitated. "Yesterday meant more to him than we realized. The photo, the word mommy, maybe even Charles." Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I thought he handled it well." "He did," Aaliyah said. "But that's the thing about kids like Liam. They hold it in. They process slower, deeper. Sometimes it takes a day or two for the grief to reach the surface." He looked toward the hallway. "What do we do?" "We make room for it." Ethan nodded. "Okay. What do you need from me?" Aaliyah paused, then said, "Can you stay home today?" He looked surprised. "Cancel everything?" She nodded. "Just be here. Not to fix. Just be." By noon, Liam was still silent, but he had come out of his room. Aaliyah sat with him on the floor of the sunroom, a blanket wrapped around them both. She hummed a low tune, a lullaby without words, and let him rest his head against her. Ethan sat nearby on the edge of the couch. His phone buzzed twice. He didn't pick it up. Instead, he leaned forward and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "When Rachel found out she was pregnant," he began. She didn't cry. She laughed. She said, "Well, I guess we're in it now, huh?" Aaliyah smiled gently. She bought books. So many books. Some of them didn't even make sense, like quantum parenting or something ridiculous. But she read them all, highlighted them. She was terrified and excited and brilliant. "80s said." Liam's eyes flickered toward him. Ethan continued. "When Liam was born, she held him like he was a secret, something precious the world couldn't touch. She used to sing this song off-key. Terrible. I don't even know where she got it, but it made him stop crying every single time." Aaliyah said, "He remembers that." Ethan looked at her. "How do you know?" "He hums it in his sleep." They sat in silence for a while, the wind pushing gently against the windows. Later that day, Aaliyah brought out something she'd been working on in secret, a small scrapbook. Nothing fancy, just a binder with laminated pages. One for each moment she'd captured since arriving. Liam's first smile in the garden, the first time he picked a block without flinching, a drawing he made of blue sky sounds, a photo of Ethan holding Liam's hand on the stairs. She handed it to Ethan. He flipped through it slowly, with reverence. "I didn't know you were keeping all this," he murmured. "Memories matter," Aaliyah said. "Especially for him. If we can't give him everything, we can at least give him a timeline he can hold on to." Ethan swallowed hard. "You think of everything." She shrugged. "Not everything. Just the things people forget to care about." Liam reached for the scrapbook, tracing his fingers over the photo of Ethan carrying him piggyback across the lawn. Then he whispered, "Daddy." Ethan froze. He turned toward Aaliyah. "Did you hear?" She nodded, eyes wide with tears. "I heard." Ethan dropped his head into his hands. It was the first time Liam had spoken that word in 2 years. That night, after dinner, the house held a different kind of silence. Not the heavy kind, not the warning, but the kind that follows breakthroughs. The hush of something sacred, protected, real. Ethan stood outside Liam's door, watching through the cracked frame as Aaliyah read from a children's book, her voice soft, melodic, and the moon said to the boy, "You are made of light, even when you feel heavy." She closed the book and kissed Liam's forehead. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. When she stepped into the hallway, she was surprised to find Ethan waiting. He looked like he wanted to say something, like something big was rising inside him, but all he said was, "Thank you." Aaliyah reached out, brushed a thumb gently under his eye, where a tear had escaped. "You're welcome," she said. "You're doing better than you think." That night, alone in his study, Ethan opened the scrapbook again. This time, he didn't just look, He added a photo. One of Aaliyah and Liam, asleep on the floor that first night. Underneath it, in quiet script, he wrote, "The night everything began to change." The knock came just after 10 a.m., sharp and deliberate. Not the uncertain rapping of a delivery man. Not the polite buzz of a guest. This knock had weight to it. Authority. It echoed through the foyer, bouncing off marble and memory like the arrival of something long buried. Aaliyah was in the kitchen, organizing Liam's lunch tray: macaroni with peas, diced pears, and a little green sticker on the plate that said, "Good choice," in bright letters. She heard the knock and glanced toward the hallway, her instincts prickling. Mrs. Collins was already moving, heels clicking like punctuation. She opened the door with her usual poise, but Aaliyah heard the shift in her tone a second later. "You didn't say you were coming," Collins said. A voice replied, low and female. "Didn't think I needed permission." That drew Aaliyah toward the entrance, curiosity outweighing caution. Standing just inside the door was a woman late 30s, polished, commanding. Her hair was styled in a sleek bob, her coat tailored to perfection. Her boots still dusted with a bit of travel. She had the look of someone who belonged everywhere, even in places she hadn't been invited. Ethan appeared at the top of the stairs, stopping mid-step as his eyes landed on the guest. A moment passed, heavy as stone. "Sabrina," he said, voice flat. Sabrina smiled faintly. "Still recognize me? I'd recognize that arrogance anywhere." Aaliyah's breath caught. She stepped back slightly, instinctively placing herself in view of the staircase where Liam might come looking for her. Her body moved without thinking. "Protect first, ask questions later." "I was in town," Sabrina continued, brushing invisible lint off her sleeve. "Thought I'd check in on the son I haven't seen since Rachel's funeral." "You've never met him," Ethan said. "Technicalities," she said with a wave of her hand. "He's family." "No," Ethan replied. "He's mine." In the silence that followed, Aaliyah slipped away to check on Liam. He was in the playroom, stacking soft blocks in methodical order, oblivious to the tension building like thunder just rooms away. She sat near him, humming under her breath, grounding both of them in the present. She knew Sabrina's type. The voice, the posture, the rehearsed affection. Aaliyah had met women like her in hospital boardrooms and charity galas, people who showed up late to grief and early to opportunity. She wasn't here for Liam. She was here for something else. Back in the foyer, Sabrina turned her attention to the house. "You've redecorated," she said. "Less sterile." "It's not your business," Ethan replied. "It is if my family's legacy is at stake." That caught Ethan's attention. "Legacy, Rachel's trust," Sabrina said. "I found out it was never activated. She designated part of it for Liam's future care. There's a board, Ethan, a legal one, and as her sister, I'm entitled to oversight." "You were estranged," Ethan snapped. "You cut her off when she needed you most." Sabrina's jaw flexed. "She didn't want help." "No," Ethan said. "She didn't want you controlling her. And she sure as hell wouldn't want you near Liam now." Sabrina's tone cooled. "Be careful, Ethan. This house may be yours, but some of what's under it isn't. I've got nothing to hide." "That's good," she said, smiling thinly. "Because I've hired an auditor." "Ernest." Ethan stared at her. "Get out." "Not until I speak to him. You're not going near my son. That's for the courts to decide." By the time Aaliyah heard the door slam shut behind Sabrina, she had already moved Liam to the art room, handing him a brush and a fresh canvas. Let him create. Let him push the storm away with color. Ethan appeared at the doorway moments later, rubbing the back of his neck like a man trying not to explode. "She's going to make trouble," he muttered. Aaliyah didn't look up. "Then we'll meet it." He stared at her. "You say that like we're in this together." She finally turned to face him. "Aren't we?" The question hovered. Ethan's expression softened, then darkened again with doubt. "She'll use everything she can, my past, Rachel's death, even you." Aaliyah didn't flinch. "Let her, because at the end of the day, none of that changes what's real." "And what's real?" Aaliyah stepped closer. "That boy trusts me, and he loves you." And nothing that woman brings will change what we've built here. Ethan exhaled slowly. She's filed for partial custody. Claims Rachel would have wanted Liam to have both sides of the family. She doesn't want custody, Aaliyah said. She wants control. He looked at her, startled by the clarity in her voice. She came in like someone who's already rehearsed her press statement. Aaliyah added, "Trust me, I've seen it. She'll charm the board, maybe even a judge. But she doesn't know him, not really." Ethan rubbed his eyes. "And now we'll have to prove that." Aaliyah gently touched his hand. "We will." That night, as rain tapped the windows like nervous fingers, Aaliyah lay awake on her mattress beside Liam's bed. He slept curled like a question mark, his bear tucked beneath his chin. Outside the room, Ethan paced the hallway, phone in hand, legal pads scattered across the desk behind him. He had already called his lawyer, already dug out the trust documents, already started the war. But in the stillness, he glanced toward Liam's door and toward the sliver of light beneath it, where he knew Aaliyah was keeping watch. She wasn't family, she wasn't blood, but she was something more dangerous to someone like Sabrina. She was constant, and maybe, just maybe, she was exactly what Liam needed to win. 3 days later, the house transformed. No longer the quiet sanctuary it had become under Aaliyah's care. It now resembled a fortress, a place preparing for siege. Lawyers came and went with portfolios tucked under arms and concern carved into their brows. Paperwork flooded Ethan's study. The front gate logs filled with new names, guardians ad litem, trust advisors, and one sharply dressed child development specialist named Dr. Helen Price. Aaliyah stayed in the background during the meetings, not because she was excluded, but because she knew the power of listening. She took notes when no one asked her to, memorized timelines, watched expressions, and most of all, she kept Liam safe emotionally, physically, spiritually, from the whirlwind outside his door. On the 4th day, Ethan called her into the study. "You're going to be questioned," he said simply. Aaliyah blinked. "By who?" "The evaluator," he replied, looking tired. "They want to assess the primary caregiver, see if Liam's receiving the appropriate emotional and developmental support for his needs." Their words. Aaliyah nodded slowly. "When?" "Tomorrow." She let out a soft breath. "Do I get a lawyer?" "You won't need one," he said. "You just need to be you." But in the deepest part of her heart, Aaliyah wasn't sure that would be enough. Not against someone like Sabrina, who played the game with velvet gloves and poison darts. That evening, Aaliyah sat with Liam in the garden. The boy was more withdrawn than usual, stacking stones in meticulous patterns, then knocking them over with deliberate care. "Can I ask you something?" she said gently, not expecting an answer. Liam kept building. "Do you remember the last time someone made you feel scared?" He paused. His hand hovered over a stone. Then he touched the scar on Aaliyah's wrist, the faint pink line from weeks ago when he had scratched her during a meltdown. She didn't flinch. She had never flinched. Then, with a whisper so soft it almost dissolved into the wind, Liam said, "I was scared I lost you." Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't," she said. "And you won't." The next morning, Dr. Helen Price arrived precisely at 9. She was composed, elegant, and armed with an iPad. Her questions were clinical at first, structured like a checklist. How does Liam respond to transitions? How do you manage sensory overstimulation? What tools do you employ when he becomes nonverbal? Aaliyah answered everything with clarity and calm, though she could feel the sweat between her shoulder blades. She offered examples, routines, even copies of the customized charts she'd created for Liam's emotional cues. Dr. Price took notes, occasionally nodding. Then she closed the iPad and asked the one question that changed the tone of the entire meeting. "Why do you care?" Aaliyah blinked. "Excuse me? You're not family. You're not certified in behavioral therapy. You're not bound by contract. So why stay? Why care this much?" Aaliyah sat up straighter. "Because when I look at Liam," she said slowly, "I don't see a diagnosis. I see a boy with a world inside him no one's ever stopped long enough to explore. Because I know what it's like to be dismissed before someone even learns your name." She hesitated, then added, "And because when he looks at me, when he trusts me, that's the kind of connection people search their whole lives for." Dr. Price stared at her for a moment, then smiled, not warmly but with respect. Thank you, she said. That's all I needed. That night, Ethan found Aaliyah in the library, curled in the same armchair Rachel once loved. How'd it go? He asked. Aaliyah looked up. I told the truth. He sat beside her. That's the best thing you could have done. She's good, Aaliyah said. Dr. Price. Smart. She doesn't miss anything. She's our best shot, Ethan replied. But Sabrina's not giving up. Her lawyers submitted photos this morning. Aaliyah stiffened. Of what? The one of you and Liam asleep on the floor. She went pale. That was, I know, Ethan said quickly. It was a moment of love. Safety. But Sabrina's twisting it into negligence. Unprofessional boundaries between hired staff and a vulnerable child. Her words. Aaliyah swallowed hard. Are they going to believe her? I don't know, Ethan admitted. But we're not done fighting. Later that night, Liam couldn't sleep. Aaliyah stayed beside him, running her fingers gently through his hair. Are you leaving? He whispered suddenly. Voice raw. Aaliyah froze. What? Sabrina said you'd go away. Aaliyah's breath caught. Listen to me, she said firmly, tears in her voice. No one gets to decide that but me. And I'm not going anywhere. Okay? He didn't answer right away. Then, softly. Promise? She kissed his forehead. With everything I am. Meanwhile, in a quiet hotel across town, Sabrina stood by the window of her suite, watching the city lights. Her phone rang. Yes? She answered. A voice replied. You were right. The nanny's emotionally entangled. There's even speculation from the staff that she and Ethan are close. Sabrina smirked. Perfect. Let's question her integrity next. And the boy? Sabrina turned, her tone icy. The boy is the pawn. We're playing chess. She hung up, her reflection in the window staring back ruthless, calculating, and unaware that the bond she tried to use as a weapon was about to become the very thing that would break her. The courtroom didn't look like the movies. There were no grand oak walls or rows of polished pews. Just muted beige paneling, flickering fluorescent lights, and the low murmur of tension that clung to every corner like dust. Ethan sat beside his attorney at the front. Aaliyah, dressed in a navy blue blouse and gray skirt, sat quietly a row behind. Her hands clutched a worn notebook in her lap, the one where she kept Liam's behavior patterns, triggers, milestones, the one she hadn't let go of since the case was filed. Sabrina entered last, as if by design. Always dramatic, always strategic. She wore black, simple but expensive, with a pearl brooch at her collar, and just the right amount of grief in her eyes. Her lawyer, slick, practiced, and void of empathy, followed her like a shadow. The judge, a gray-haired woman named Helen Maddox, called for silence. This hearing is a review of the emergency petition filed by Miss Isis Sabrina Alcott, sister of the late Rachel Ward, regarding shared custody and oversight of minor Liam Ward. All parties present? Yes, Your Honor, said both attorneys in unison. Let's begin. The first 2 hours were dry. Financial documents, care plans, background checks. Ethan's team had come prepared, and his lawyer, Mr. Petrov, made a strong case for stability. Ethan's sole custody, Liam's behavioral improvements under Aaliyah's care, the custom therapies and sensory tools in place. Then came Sabrina's turn. Her lawyer rose slowly. We'd like to enter evidence demonstrating concern about the primary caregiver's qualifications and behavior. Petrov stood. Objection. Ms. Thomas isn't on trial here. The judge raised a hand. Let's hear the concern, briefly. Sabrina's lawyer turned toward the screen as a slideshow began. Photo 1. Aaliyah asleep on the floor, Liam curled beside her. Photo 2. A blurry shot from a distance, Ethan handing Aaliyah a blanket. Their faces close in what could be interpreted as intimate conversation. Photo 3. A log of text messages between Ethan and Aaliyah, including a message that read, I trust you with him more than anyone. Taken alone, the images told a story. But it wasn't their story. Your Honor, the attorney said smoothly, this suggests an inappropriate level of attachment between Mr. Ward, and a domestic employee, potentially clouding judgment when it comes to decisions about Liam's well-being. The courtroom murmured. Aaliyah stared straight ahead, her spine stiff. Ethan looked ready to leap over the table. Judge Maddox tapped her gavel once. Let's keep this focused. Miss Alcott, do you have anything else to add? Sabrina rose, crocodile tears glistening in her lashes. Rachel was my only sister. When she passed, I wasn't in the country. I've regretted that every day. I only want to be a part of my nephew's life. But how can I, when he's been emotionally absorbed by someone who's not family? Her voice cracked perfectly. The performance was Oscar-worthy. I'm not saying Miss Thomas doesn't care, Sabrina continued, casting a glance over her shoulder. But caring isn't parenting, and love without structure, without credentials, can be dangerous. Petrov rose. Your Honor, with your permission, we'd like to call Miss Thomas to testify. The judge nodded. Aaliyah stood. She moved like a wave, graceful, composed, but full of undercurrent. The bailiff guided her to the witness chair. She took the oath. Her voice, strong. Petrov began simply. Miss Thomas, how did you come to work for the Ward family? I was placed through a reputable agency after a series of other caregivers left. Liam had specific needs. I stayed. Why? Because he deserved someone who wouldn't leave. Petrov nodded. Can you describe Liam's progress since you arrived? Aaliyah opened her notebook. He's gone from 2-word phrases to full sentences. He makes eye contact. He sleeps through the night. He initiates hugs. And your qualifications? I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm a former special ed assistant and a trauma-informed caregiver. I've studied behavioral therapy independently and implemented sensory routines personalized for Liam. Most importantly, I listened to him. The opposing lawyer stood. Miss Thomas, are you in a romantic relationship with Mr. Ward? Aaliyah met her gaze. No, but you live in the same house. I sleep on a mattress beside Liam's bed because that's where he feels safe. And you believe that's appropriate? Aaliyah inhaled. I believe doing whatever it takes to make a child feel safe is always appropriate. Sabrina's lawyer smirked. Isn't it true you've developed emotional dependence on this family, that your personal boundaries have been compromised? Aaliyah leaned forward. Isn't it true that you're trying to tear apart the only stable home Liam has ever known? Gasps. The judge banged the gavel. That's enough, Judge Maddox said, but her tone wasn't angry. It was sharp, alert. After lunch, Dr. Helen Price was called. She gave her testimony with clinical grace. Liam Ward has formed a primary attachment to Ms. Thomas. Removing her could cause severe regression. While she is not a family member in blood, her presence has become critical to his emotional regulation and development. And Mr. Ward? The judge asked. Dr. Price paused. He's learning. He was once distant. Now he's engaged. Miss Thomas didn't replace the mother Liam lost. She helped him trust again so his father could return to him. As court adjourned for the day, Judge Maddox called both attorneys to her chambers. Outside the courtroom, Ethan walked up to Aaliyah. You were amazing, he said softly. She gave a weary smile. She's not finished. Not yet. No, he said, stepping closer. But I think the judge saw the truth today. Aaliyah's eyes searched his. And what is the truth, Ethan? He hesitated. Then, quietly, that I don't just trust you with him. A beat passed. His hand brushed hers. I trust you with me. In the hotel room, Sabrina threw her earrings onto the dresser. That nanny just made herself a target, she hissed to her lawyer on the phone. Dig deeper. There has to be something, anything we can use. But no amount of digging would prepare her for what came next, because Liam was about to speak for himself, and the voice she thought he didn't have was louder than anything she'd ever faced. The sun broke through the clouds that morning like a quiet revelation, casting long golden streaks through the windows of the Ward estate, the kind of light that felt sacred, like the day itself knew something important was coming. Aaliyah moved through the house with care, replacing Liam's blanket with the clean, lavender-scented one he liked, organizing his morning activities by color, prepping the oatmeal just the way he preferred, warm, smooth, and exactly 3 blueberries in the center. Ethan stood in the doorway watching her. He knows something's going on, she said softly without turning around. I figured, he replied. He's been watching me, more than usual, like he's trying to read my thoughts. Aaliyah placed the bowl on Liam's table. He's afraid. So am I, Ethan confessed. Aaliyah finally looked at him. But he's not alone. And neither are you. That afternoon, Judge Maddox scheduled an in-home observation and unannounced visit. The knock came just after 3 p.m. Ethan opened the door to find the judge standing there in plain clothes, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the court-appointed guardian, Mr. Bailey, nodded once. We're here to see Liam in his natural environment, the judge said. No special presentations, no choreography. You'll get none, Ethan replied. Aaliyah greeted them both and offered coffee. Judge Maddox declined, but Mr. Bailey accepted with a polite nod. Liam was in the sensory room, his soft sanctuary of weighted blankets, muted lighting, and a gentle bubble tube glowing in the corner. They approached the room slowly. Liam sat in the middle, sorting puzzle pieces, each one bearing an emotion icon. Happy, angry, afraid, calm. Aaliyah crouched beside him. Liam, we have visitors today, she said gently. They want to understand you better. Is that okay? He paused, blinked at the strangers. Then, carefully, returned to his puzzle. Judge Maddox watched quietly. Does he always respond this calmly to new people? No, Aaliyah said honestly. But when he's in this room, he feels safe. That makes a difference. Does he speak often? Not always with words, she said. But when he does, it matters. The judge and guardian sat for 20 minutes. Observing. Taking notes. No questions. No pressure. Then something happened. Liam picked up the afraid puzzle piece and looked at Aaliyah. Yesterday, he said, voice hoarse from disuse. Courtroom. Aaliyah's breath caught. Yes, baby, she whispered, stunned but steady. We were in a courtroom. Liam turned to Ethan, whose eyes were now wide, shining. Lady said. Liam paused, struggling. Said you. Not good. Ethan knelt slowly, bringing himself to Liam's eye level. I heard that too, he said gently. But you know what I think? Liam nodded once. You love me. Ethan's lips trembled. Always. Well. Then Liam reached for Aaliyah's hand. He turned to the judge and said something no one expected. This is my safe. The judge blinked. Excuse me? Liam tapped his own chest, then pointed at Aaliyah. She's my safe. A silence fell over the room like a warm blanket. Mr. Bailey swallowed hard. That's remarkably clear. Aaliyah couldn't speak. Her throat closed with emotion. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. His grip firm, grounding. Judge Maddox stared at Liam for a long moment, then quietly closed her clipboard. I've heard enough for today, she said. After they left, Ethan sank onto the living room sofa, his suit jacket unbuttoned, hair slightly disheveled. Aaliyah joined him, her hands still trembling. Did that just happen? She asked. He let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for days. He called you his safe, Ethan murmured. Aaliyah pressed her hand to her heart. I never thought he'd say it. Neither did I. She looked at him. What if it's not enough? What if... Ethan stopped her with a look. It's enough, he said. It has to be. Then he reached into the drawer of the coffee table and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't open it, just held it in his palm like a secret still waiting for permission. I bought this weeks ago, he said quietly. And every time I tried to give it to you, I stopped. I thought maybe you'd think it was too fast, or inappropriate, or that I was confusing gratitude for love. Aaliyah stared at the box, breath shallow. But now, he continued, after today, I know what this is. He opened it. Inside, a simple ring. Gold. Understated. Eternal. Aaliyah's hand flew to her mouth. Ethan stood. I'm not asking for an answer right now. I just wanted you to know. This family is already real to me. Liam knows it. I know it. And when you're ready, I want you to know it too. It's a single tear rolled down Aaliyah's cheek. She didn't answer, not with words, but she nodded once. And somehow, that was louder than any yes could ever be. Across town, Sabrina sat in her hotel room with a half-empty glass of wine and a folder of documents spread before her. She opened her email. One new message from her investigator. Subject: "You need to see this." She clicked, and what she saw made her freeze. A copy of the transcript from the in-home visit. Liam's words: "She's my safe." Sabrina slammed her laptop shut. For the first time in weeks, she was afraid. The next morning dawned overcast, with wind pushing against the Ward estate like an invisible hand warning of what was to come. But inside the house, something had changed. It wasn't just the warmth between Ethan and Aaliyah, or the way Liam hummed more freely as he moved from room to room. It was the quiet confidence like a tide had turned. Aaliyah stood in the kitchen, humming as she packed Liam's snack box. He liked his apples cut into thin moons. She arranged them gently, as if each slice held meaning. Behind her, Ethan watched her move, the velvet box still in his pocket, heavier now with hope. "Do you think she'll back down?" Aaliyah asked, not looking up. "Sabrina?" Ethan scoffed. "She doesn't back down. She shifts strategies." Aaliyah nodded slowly. "So we stay ready." He stepped closer, placed a hand on her back. "We're always ready, because now, she's not just fighting me, she's fighting truth." Sabrina didn't go to court that day. Instead, she met with her legal team in a glass tower overlooking the city. Her face was tight, lips pressed in a grim line. "She's winning hearts," her lawyer said, placing a thick file on the table. "Not just with Liam's testimony. Staff members have written statements. Even the agency that placed her is backing her as a model caregiver. There's Bond CAT 97. Sabrina flipped through the papers. Glowing reviews. Anecdotes about Aaliyah staying late without pay. Notes about her reorganizing therapy plans to better match Liam's rhythms. A whole narrative of dedication and love. "Public opinion is turning," the lawyer added. "If this goes to a full custody battle, it'll make headlines. You'll be painted as the bitter aunt, trying to rip a child away from the only peace he's known." Sabrina's eyes darkened. "Then we change the story." "Erez." The lawyer hesitated. "How?" "We leak something. Aaliyah has no family, no history here. She must have a past. There's nothing criminal in her records. Then find something human." Sabrina hissed. "A mistake. A regret. Anything to remind the court that she is not flawless." The lawyer made a note. "We'll dig." But behind her poised exterior, even Sabrina felt the panic rising. She had underestimated them. She had expected a fight, not a fortress. Back at the estate, Liam tugged on Aaliyah's sleeve. "Can I show you?" he asked shyly. She knelt. "Show me what, sweetheart?" He led her to the garden, to a corner they hadn't visited in weeks. There, in the soil, were small stones, each one painted with a face. "His therapy project." "This one," Liam said, pointing. "You." Aaliyah picked up the small stone, painted brown with a soft smile. "And this?" she asked, holding up another with a tiny gold dot on its head. "Daddy." And the others?" Liam pointed to 3 more, each blank. "I don't know them yet," he whispered. "But maybe one could be Mommy," he said. "If she's watching." Aaliyah's throat closed. "She is," she said. "I believe she is." That night, after Liam went to bed, Ethan brought out a sealed envelope and handed it to Aaliyah. "What's this?" she asked. "The final audit of Rachel's trust." Aaliyah opened it slowly, eyes scanning the first few lines. "They're giving you full oversight," Ethan said. "Not Sabrina. The board reviewed everything, including the court transcripts. They're recommending you be named as Liam's educational advocate." Aaliyah looked up, stunned. "Me? You've earned it," he said. "All of it." For the first time in weeks, she let herself cry freely. "You really believe I belong here, don't you?" she asked. He reached for her hand. "Aaliyah, you are here, and I don't want to do any of this without you. Meanwhile, in her hotel room, Sabrina opened a package that had just been couriered in. Inside was a folder labeled, "Confidential, Aaliyah Thomas, Background Inquiry." She opened it with trembling fingers. The first page showed a faded photo. Aaliyah, 5 years younger, sitting on the steps of a women's shelter. Underneath it, a record, not criminal, but haunting. A restraining order filed years ago against a man named Trevor Barnes. Her abuser. Sabrina's lips curled. Finally, she whispered. A flaw. But what she didn't realize was this. That story wasn't shameful. It was the reason Aaliyah became who she was, and exposing it wouldn't destroy her. It would set her free. The headlines hit the internet just after sunrise. Billionaire's nanny has violent past, exposing the woman behind the perfect image. Resurfaced documents show dark history of Ethan Ward's caregiver. The article was slick, laced with suggestion more than substance. It featured an old photo of Aaliyah, eyes swollen, sitting outside a women's shelter. The reporter called her a woman with a troubling past of domestic instability and hinted without proof that her proximity to Liam might pose emotional risks. Ethan was in the kitchen when he saw the alert. His coffee cup nearly shattered in his grip. He burst into the hallway. "Where's Aaliyah?" "Playroom," Collins replied, already holding her phone. "She hasn't seen it yet." Ethan didn't wait. Aaliyah was building a marble track with Liam when he entered, eyes wide, voice gentle. "Aaliyah," she turned, sensing the storm before he even spoke. "It's out, isn't it?" He nodded. "I'm so sorry." She swallowed hard. "Did they use the shelter photo?" "Yes." "And Trevor's name?" "No, just suggestions. They're trying to make people fill in the blanks." She stood slowly. Liam, unaware of the shift, kept stacking tracks with quiet focus. "I knew this day might come," she said. "I just didn't know it would feel like this." Ethan approached her carefully. "You don't owe anyone an explanation. Not after everything you survived." She shook her head. "But I owe it to myself not to hide anymore." 2 hours later, Aaliyah stood before a bank of microphones in the front yard. It wasn't planned. It wasn't polished. But when the paparazzi came, when the internet screamed, when Sabrina tried to weaponize her past, Aaliyah did the one thing no one expected. She told the truth. "My name is Aaliyah Thomas," she said, her voice steady. "When I was 23, I survived a year-long relationship with a man who nearly destroyed me. I didn't have family to run to. I didn't have money. I had a suitcase and a bus pass. And I ended up at a women's shelter in Baltimore, trying to remember how to breathe." The crowd fell silent. "I'm not ashamed of that chapter," she continued, "because it taught me how to recognize pain in others. It taught me how to see the child who hides behind silence. It taught me how to stay when things get hard." She looked directly into the cameras. "I work for Mr. Ethan Ward. But I care for Liam Ward because he is worth every fight, every meltdown, every misunderstood moment. My past is not a scandal. It's my strength." And then, quietly, "No one can use it against me anymore." Inside the estate, Sabrina watched the press conference unfold live on television. Her smirk faded. Her drink remained untouched. She flipped it. She muttered. Her lawyer texted seconds later. "We're losing the narrative. Public sentiment has shifted." Sabrina didn't reply, because she knew it wasn't just the public she'd lost. It was the war. Later that evening, Judge Maddox called an emergency review session. The court had received a flood of letters from therapists, former students Aaliyah had mentored, even parents from her old school, all testifying not just to her capability, but her resilience. Sabrina tried to object, but the judge cut her off. "This court recognizes the attempts made to assassinate the character of Miss Thomas," Maddox said firmly. "We also recognize those attempts have backfired." She turned to Aaliyah. "This court does not just commend you, it learns from you." Then to Sabrina. "Your petition for shared custody is denied." Sabrina stood, stunned. "And any future appeals," the judge added, "will be considered harassment unless new compelling evidence is presented which, frankly, I doubt exists." Ethan found Aaliyah standing in the garden that night, gazing up at the stars. He approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt her quiet victory. "Do you regret speaking up?" he asked. "No," she said. "For the first time, I feel whole." He stood beside her, silent for a beat. Then, "The ring's still in my pocket, by the way." She smiled. "Do I get to see it again?" He pulled it out. This time, he didn't stay silent. "Aaliyah Thomas, you are the strongest woman I've ever known. You saved my son. You saved me. And I don't want another day to pass without you knowing that you belong in this family not just as Liam's safe place, but as mine. Aaliyah looked at the ring, then at him. I don't need a perfect life, she whispered. I just need a real one. Then marry me, he said. And let's build that life. One morning, one meltdown, one miracle at a time. She didn't hesitate. Yes. Behind them, in the window, Liam stood with his bear in one hand and the painted rock of Aaliyah in the other. He smiled. He knew what family looked like now. Autumn came early that year. The leaves around the estate began to blush with reds and golds, and the cool breeze carried the scent of earth and wood smoke. It was the kind of season that reminded people of change, real, lasting change, the kind that doesn't come with fireworks or fanfare, but with quiet, undeniable certainty. Inside the house, preparations were quietly underway. Not for a wedding, not yet, but for something just as meaningful. The ceremony was Ethan's idea. Not in a chapel, not before a crowd, just the three of them. I don't want you to wait until we've signed papers or mailed invitations, he said, sitting across from Aaliyah at the kitchen table one morning. You deserve more than a ceremony after the fact. You deserve a vow now. Aaliyah looked down, her fingers curling around the rim of her coffee mug. What kind of vow? Ethan smiled gently. The kind that means something to Liam. And to us, with Life Day. So, 3 days later, as the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees, Ethan, Aaliyah, and Liam stood in the backyard beneath the old elm tree, the one Rachel used to sit under during her final months. A quiet nod to the past. A peaceful place to start again. Liam wore his favorite navy sweater and khakis. He held Aaliyah's hand tightly, the other tucked behind his back like he was hiding a secret. Ethan stood opposite them, a small card in his hand. No guests, no priest, just their voices, their truth. Ethan went first. I don't know how you walked into my world and managed to fix it without making me feel broken, he said softly. You didn't just care for my son, you gave him back to me. And in the process, you showed me what strength looks like, what love really is. He turned to Liam, then back to Aaliyah. I vow to protect this family, no matter what. I vow to never let silence grow between us. I vow to show up not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. And I vow to love you in the quiet moments, not just the loud ones. Aaliyah blinked quickly, biting her lip as she unfolded a small, handwritten note. I've lived my life afraid of being forgotten, she said, her voice shaking but clear. But then you both looked at me like I'd been here all along. Like I was always meant to be here. She glanced down at Liam, who looked up at her with wide, calm eyes. I vow to be your calm, your constant, your comfort. I vow to listen when you speak and when you can't. I vow to never walk away, no matter how loud the storm gets. She paused. I vow that this love, this family will never have to prove itself again. Because it already has. Liam tugged her hand. I have one too, he whispered. Aaliyah knelt. From behind his back, Liam pulled out a drawing crumpled, but clearly cherished. 3 stick figures, holding hands under the big tree, one small, one tall, one with a swirl of curls that was clearly meant to be her. This is us, he said, forever. Aaliyah choked back a sob. That's the best vow I've ever heard, she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. That evening, they sat around the fire pit, wrapped in blankets, toasting marshmallows. Liam curled up between them, drowsy from the day, his head on Aaliyah's shoulder. Ethan reached across and squeezed her hand. You know, he said, we still have to tell the world. Make it official. She smiled. We will. Rachel would have loved this, he said, voice low. Aaliyah nodded. She would have been proud. And Sabrina? She's done, Aaliyah said, not with anger, but with finality. She can't touch what we've built. Not anymore. Ethan leaned in, resting his head against hers. No matter how this story started, he whispered, it ends with you. It finite, but just when it seemed the final chapter was writing itself in peace and permanence, an envelope arrived. No return address, no handwriting, just Liam's name typed neatly on the front. Collins found it in the mailbox and handed it to Ethan without comment. Inside, a photograph. Rachel, pregnant, smiling, standing next to a man who was not Ethan. On the back, in scrawled ink, "Do you know who his real father is?" The fire pit crackled behind him as Ethan stared at the image. Breath frozen. Aaliyah, noticing his silence, looked over. "What is it?" she asked. He said nothing, just slowly passed her the photo, and in that moment, everything paused. Again, the photograph trembled in Aaliyah's hand. She stared at Rachel's glowing face, her rounded belly, and the tall stranger beside her, with an arm around her back. The man wasn't Ethan. His smile was unfamiliar, his presence unexplained, and yet, the resemblance to Liam was undeniable. Ethan sat stiffly on the bench beside the fire pit, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the flames like they might somehow burn the question out of his mind. "This has to be a lie," he said, his voice low, strained. "Some twisted attempt to destroy everything we've built." Aaliyah wanted to agree. She wanted to toss the photo into the fire and pretend it never existed. But the truth didn't work like that. "It doesn't matter who sent it," she said gently. "What matters is whether it's real." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Are you saying you believe it?" "I'm saying Liam deserves to know," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And so do you." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in his study long after Aaliyah had gone to bed, the photograph lying on the desk beside an unopened bottle of scotch. Memories flooded back Rachel's final months, her distance, the way she seemed to carry a secret like a weight she never spoke of. Had he been blind? Or just unwilling to see? By morning, he'd made his decision. 3 days later, the DNA test came back. Ethan sat alone in the clinic office, Aaliyah beside him, holding his hand tightly. The doctor entered with a sealed envelope. "We processed the swabs. Are you ready?" Ethan nodded once. The doctor opened it. "The test confirms that Mr. Ward is not the biological father of Liam Ward." Time stopped. The world didn't collapse. It just slowed. Ethan didn't move. He didn't speak. Aaliyah could feel the air thicken with something between grief and fury. But then he exhaled. Long, deep, measured, and said only one thing. "It doesn't change anything." Later that night, as Liam played with his painted stones in the garden, Ethan sat beside him. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. Liam nodded. "When your mom was sick, she didn't always tell me everything. And I think maybe she thought she was protecting both of us." Liam didn't look up. "But I want you to know this. No matter what anyone says, no matter what blood says, you are my son." Liam finally turned, eyes wide, uncertain. "I don't care what that test says," Ethan continued, voice soft. "I've held you when you cried. I've stayed up nights learning how to understand you. I've loved you since the moment I saw you. Nothing changes that." He reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the painted stones, one Liam had labeled with a lightning bolt. "Do you remember what this one means?" "Scared," Liam said softly. Ethan nodded. "I was scared. But not of you. Of losing you. And now I know I won't." Liam reached for his hand, and that was the answer. Aaliyah stood in the doorway watching them, tears in her eyes. This wasn't just a love story. It was a story of chosen family, of healing, of standing in the fire and refusing to run. When Ethan rose and walked toward her, there was no hesitation. "You still want to marry a man who just found out he's not the father of his own son?" he asked with a sad smile. She placed her hand on his heart. "I want to marry the man who chose to be his father anyway." The wedding was held under the same elm tree a month later. Nothing extravagant, just friends, a few staff members, and Liam standing proudly between them with a small velvet pillow in his hands. Aaliyah wore a soft ivory gown, simple and elegant, her curls loose around her shoulders. Ethan wore navy, a blue tie Liam had picked out himself. They didn't exchange traditional vows. Instead, they told the story of how they met, how they fought, how they stayed, and then, together, they turned to Liam. "Do you take us as your forever family?" Aaliyah asked. Liam looked up at them with the clearest, strongest voice they'd ever heard. "I do." Across town, in a dark apartment filled with bitter silence, Sabrina watched the wedding video being shared online. Millions of views, thousands of comments, and none of them spoke her name. She closed the laptop. There would be no more battles. She had lost, but somewhere deep inside her, a part of her heart finally softened, just enough to let go. As the sun set over the Ward estate, Ethan, Aaliyah, and Liam danced slowly on the lawn, the world quiet around them. No more secrets, no more lies. Just the truth, just the love, just the family they chose and the one that chose them back. The story reminds us that family is not defined by blood, but by love, commitment, and the quiet courage to stay when things get hard. It shows that healing can come from the most unexpected places, and that true strength lies in vulnerability. In a world quick to judge by appearances or past mistakes, this story teaches us that compassion, consistency, and chosen love can rewrite destiny, and that sometimes the most powerful bonds are the ones we choose for ourselves.